Friday morning, my friends. I'm Pastor Ben Hayes from First Baptist Church, Dadeville, Alabama, bringing you our thought for the day on what I hope is going to be a fantastic Friday. Now, think about this today. God has created this day for you and for me to glorify Him. And so I want you to think about that as you serve Him today. Find a way to make someone's day a little bit brighter. And remember this weekend, Sunday morning, 8:45, Bible study, 10 a.m., worship. What a great opportunity to come together in the grace of God. And then, of course, Sunday evening, our family night meal, fellowship supper, and business meeting. Be a part of all that. Look at Romans 15 with me today as we finish up this week. And remember, we're talking about Paul has fully preached the gospel everywhere he went because God made him the apostle to the Gentiles. His business was to admonish believers, to help them grow in their understanding of who God is. And look at what he says in verse 20. He says, "And so I have made it my aim to preach the gospel, not where Christ was named, lest I should build on another man's foundation. But as it is written, to whom he was not announced, they shall see, and those who have not heard shall understand." Now, let me explain this to you just a little bit. You probably get this, right? Paul said, my goal was to go places where no one else had ever gone before, to preach the gospel to places and people that had never heard about Jesus. Now, I want you to understand, just about everywhere Paul went, there were people who were Jewish people. Some of them may have heard about what had happened back in Jerusalem with Jesus, but most of them did not. And so he would come to them and he would begin to preach to the Jewish population the Old Testament prophecies of Messiah and how Jesus met those prophecies, fulfilled those prophecies. And so some of those people would believe. Many would not. They would force him out of the synagogue, and so he would go to the Gentiles, start a house church, and he would begin telling them about Jesus. Paul says, I did this because I didn't want to build on some foundation that someone else had built. In other words, he didn't want to come after Peter, who had begun to create the church and then teach from there. He wanted to start from scratch, not because he didn't trust Peter, not because he didn't trust the other apostles, but that was his calling. See, here it is in our day and age, that much the same happens. There are missionaries who are called to go to places where people have never heard the gospel. And they start with nothing, with no understanding of who Jesus is. And they begin to build a foundation and they grow these people to the point where they realize that Jesus is Messiah and they trust him with their hearts and their lives. And sometimes that takes years. Sometimes it takes decades to get that through to people and help them to understand. And then there are people like me who are called not to go into the uttermost parts of the world, but to be pastors of churches to help people who already know Jesus or have an understanding of who Jesus is, to grow them so that some of them will become missionaries to go into the uttermost parts of the world and proclaim the gospel to people who have never heard. That's one of the things that I pray about daily, that God would begin to call out the call, those that He's chosen to do this work, that they be willing to respond in obedience to Him, whether it's here in Dadeville, Alabama, throughout the state of Alabama, the United States of America, or into the uttermost parts of the world, wherever it might be, to grow them to that point. Paul says, that's not me. My goal, my calling is to be the apostle sent to those who have never heard, the missionary who goes into the uttermost parts of the world, to those that have never heard. That's what he says in verse 21, to whom he was not announced, so that they will see the gospel. And those who have not heard, they will understand the gospel. That was his calling, and God had gifted him to do that. He had the gift of being an apostle, an evangelist, and people responded to that. I have the gift of a pastor teacher, and so people respond to me in that sense as I teach the word and preach the word and guide the church in the direction God would have us to go. And so understand, we all have our different gifts. We all have our place in the kingdom of heaven. And you need to discover your place. Have you ever thought about that? Where do you fit in to the ministry? What do you need to be doing? Because God, if He has called you into a relationship with Himself, has gifted you to be a part of the ministry of the kingdom. And you need to discover your purpose, your place, your passion, And if you need to have more information on that, come and talk to me. I'll be glad to share with you how you can figure that out. But I want you to be blessed this weekend. Have a great weekend, and I will see you back here on Monday.